For our main topic this week on Mastering Dungeons, we are looking at a new year and a new campaign. So, with the new year coming, we wanted to give some tips and advice on starting new campaigns, whether you're a first time DM or whether you have tons of experience. We plan to specifically focus on D&D, but there are a ton of great games out there, old and new, and we might touch on a few of those as we go. One of the reasons that this has come up is because it is new Gamemaster Month. Tell us about what new Gamemaster Month is, Teos.
This is something that every year, Monte Cook Games, the folks there have been organizing the event, partnering with other companies, which I think is really cool, to say, hey, you want to get started playing one of these games? Here's everything you can do. And sort of every day you could complete a task and move forward to get experience in this. And so you kind of go to one of the tabs on the webpage and select the game you're interested in. The games are Numenera, Magical Kitties Save the Day, Trail of Cthulhu, Age of Vikings, Monster of the Week, Delta Green, Savage Worlds, Tales of the Valiant, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and Daggerheart. The guides include step-by-step approaches, overviews, and downloads for the game of your choice. So if you want to try one of these games, it's the perfect way to do it. But something you and I have often talked about, Shawn, is even if a game is not on that list, almost any RPG out there will have a free quick start you can check out. If it's a popular game, just about guarantee that somewhere out there on drive-thru on their website, you can find a quick play that often is actually the easiest way to learn the rules, because the rules will be condensed into like 8 pages instead of 120. Right. And then there'll be pre-gens and a adventure that's easy to run. And so it's really like perfect to start with. And then you can buy the full game to take it from there.
Yeah. And that led me to the question of, if I wanted to start DMing D&D, where would I go? What would be the thing that I did? So I went to D&D Beyond because, hey, that's sort of the central hub for D&D. Yeah. So what do they have? And they have a great learn to play section, but there really isn't a learn to DM section of the site. And I think it's because the site is trying to do a lot of things, right? It's hosting the character builder. It's hosting all of the digital products. It's trying to do a lot of different things. And that's sort of one thing where it might not be completely clear where, oh, I want to DM, what do I do? And so that led me to this question, which I wanted to ask our viewers, ask our listeners, and ask you, Teos.
Yeah.
What is the best way to get people, including existing players, into the D&D seat?
Yeah, and I'm just looking at this website when you click on the Learn to Play link, and it's amazing how this has, in subtle ways, changed over time. It used to have things like, remember, you could play a sort of choose your own adventure story, and maybe that's somewhere on this website, but it's no longer here. And it almost feels like what this webpage now is make a free character on D&D Beyond, and then it's buy products. There actually aren't a lot of lessons here, which I find super, super interesting. All right, so best way to get people, including existing players, to get into the DM seat. I mean, one of the things that we see really mentioned over and over again is watching someone play.
Yeah, and I think that has been a free tool that Wizards has taken advantage of over the years. Right. They did sponsor certain actual plays that Chris Perkins ran. But for the most part, it's been Critical Role. It's been, I forgot the family. Dimension 20, but there was the family. There were brothers.
Oh, yeah.
You know who I'm talking about. I can't remember the last name. Mick something.
Yes. That's exactly what I managed to do, was to say McElroy.
McElroy's. Yep, the McElroy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actual plays, I think, have a mixed record, or at least a hard to follow. It's hard to statistically really understand what goes on when people watch actual play and to what extent they convert over, I don't think there's good understanding of that. And I'd go back, I don't know if you're thinking this or not, but I'd go back to say that while a lot of people will tell you, oh, you can watch this, and certainly I do meet people who say, oh, I watched X show and it was, I watched Ank, I watched whatever, and it was super inspiring, and now I want to be a DM. When you decide you want to be a DM, and if you want to find out how to do it, I think that's where it gets harder, right? Even if you did watch one of these shows and you say, good, well, what are the skills that I need to build up? And then it feels like there is a lot of information sort of all over the place, and it's a lot harder. Some companies have tried to help that, like for Daggerheart, Matt Mercer does a whole series on YouTube of how to be a Daggerheart DM. And you can watch a series of videos that explain the mechanics, explain what you're playing with, how you're using fear, things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and this has always been such a fascinating question for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? As somebody who's educator adjacent, let's say,
Yeah.
um, you know, DMing requires a lot, but it's not as hard as sometimes people make it out to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, getting people over that fear, I think, is always a good first step. And
Yeah.
sometimes the best way to get over the thing is just to do the thing. And so, I've seen educational attempts made to
Sure.
have panels or have things. Uh, Dungeon Master University, when I went to Gen Con, Dungeon Master University and D&D in a Castle, which are sort of, I think they're run by the same people. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
they are. Yeah.
D&D in a Castle was in the Wizards of the Coast space at Gen Con. So I have a feeling that that's sponsored somehow, which
Yeah.
may be at least an attempt to give people an option to
It is.
learn in that environment.
The thing is, it's a super expensive option. I think
Well,
Patchwork
for sure.
Paladin had there was some discussion somewhere about this by someone who had attended. I don't know if it was on Sly Flourish's Discord, but the thing is, it's just a lot of money. And so it's only a
Sure.
small segment that can afford to go to DM University. The concept is good, but
Yeah, yeah.
but the question is, how do you create this program, right? And I remember back during 4th edition for the release, I think it was of Monster Manual 3.
Okay.
They did a special in-store event, and they sent kits out with amazing miniatures, including rare miniatures that had a pretty good value at the time, like multiples of them. And what you did was, and I forget if it came with, no, it came with a map. So it was a map of tile, like that looked like dungeon tiles, but it was a printed poster map. And what you did was you took turns, some people being DMs, and
Mhm.
taking the various ingredients that were provided to sort of create a
Mhm.
skirmish type adventure. But you were also
Right.
encouraged to, do some plot things and so on. And
Yeah.
then the other side played it. And then they got to take the same ingredients and build their dungeon out and challenge you. I thought that was a really, it's not perfect. It wasn't a perfect event, but it's a really fun idea of just
Yeah.
encouraging you to just jump in. I think a lot of people showed up not knowing what the event was like. So it really was like, by the way, you're going to be a DM now. Like, wait, what? Like, okay,
Right.
sure. I'll get a free mini. Okay.
Yeah. 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 And so that's the question
Mm-hmm.
that I have overarching all of
Yeah.
that stuff or all of this stuff we're about to discuss is it worth it for game companies, specifically
Mm.
for D&D, to spend some of those marketing funds, to spend some of that budget to support people who are wanting to go either from player to DM or just get into DMing right from the start? Uh, and right, and so Teos is holding up the Stranger Things box set, and he could just as easily be holding up the
Yeah.
beginner box set,
But
Heroes of
but
the
I just
Borderlands.
the thing that sticks out to me is when I hold this up is that it's Eddie, Eddie Munson who's welcoming you with the open arms. It's such a good scene in
Yeah,
that episode where he just opens up his arms to kind of say like I'm the DM and welcome to this amazing world. And I think that's the kind of like to me that's the answer. Should we be working on this? Of course, that's why you've got Eddie on the cover, right?
right.
It's this idea, and I think that going to the D&D Beyond page and not finding something for DMs is telling that D&D sort of hasn't known what to tell DMs to excite
Yeah.
them, which is a problem. I think other games have done better of making it seem fun to be the DM and exciting. And I think things like malice and fear are neat ways to get your DM to go, oh, I get to do that. That's cool. Or the players watching it and they go, oh, that is really neat that you get to do that. I might want to DM, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we'll keep
Yeah.
mulling that
Yeah.
question over as we go through this new year, new campaign. So first of all, let's talk to the people out there who maybe are players but
Mm-hmm.
have never DM'd and they're not quite sure if they should or if they could. Let's talk about why you should game master. Let's why you should be the DM.
It doesn't hurt too much.
It doesn't. It
No.
doesn't. Generally, I would say it's fun. I
It's
think
super fun.
playing is fun,
Yeah.
right? And the joy that you get as a player is somehow facilitated by this DM, by this game
Yeah.
master.
Yeah.
And if you are a player, you are responsible generally for the fun that you have, right?
Mm.
You can make it fun for other players, but for the most part, it's you're making your fun. If you're the game master and you do a great job, you're
Mm.
facilitating not just your fun, but really the fun for everybody else. You
Yeah.
are multiplying the fun several fold.
Yeah. But it's not only giving. Like there's a ton of giving, and I love that point. But also, it is super gratifying when you know, come up with a neat, mysterious angle, and then your player's on the edge of the seats trying to figure out what happened, right? Like those kinds of things, or you introduce a surprise and you do see them like recoil back. Oh, wait, what's happening? I mean, those moments are super, super satisfying. Um, and just also that you get to create the world, paint the pictures, right? That it's sort of your vision of what should be happening. And I think when we watch scenes like Eddie Munson and Stranger Things, we do get that sense, or the episodes of Community, of what fun it is to be responsible for that world and putting it together. It's not just fun on a per session basis, it's a lifetime of wonder and creativity. And it's what makes this hobby incredible, because there isn't just you can't just pull the be a DM off a shelf or slot it into your brain like we would in Shadowrun or the Matrix. It's something you keep perfecting endlessly and never achieve perfection, but have that fun all the way through it, right?
Yeah. I can't count the number of times I've run a 4-hour session at a convention
Mm-hmm.
with the understanding that I'll have an hour break and then I'll have to do it again. And as I sat down at that first table, as I sit down, I think, how am I going to get through 8 hours of this? And by the end of the 4 hours of the first table, I can't wait for the next table, right? There's
Yep.
this high that
Yeah.
comes with it. That is in the, I'm sure performers, I'm not a performer, but I'm sure performers must feel this way.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is amazing.
And when
And
you get
as
that great
yeah,
table, it's just like I
oh
remember a
yeah,
couple of years ago, I ran one friend and a bunch of his brand new friends through the Planescape Epic.
okay,
And just they were reacting like everything I put out there, they loved. It was just this perfect, like it was just like the best feel good, right? That everything I did, they really bounced off of, they elevated it. Then I would take it a step further. And at some point, one of my friends walked by our table and just goes like, okay, that's a great table. And I was like, yes, this
yeah,
is the best.
yeah. It's hard to describe how great that
Mm-hmm.
is. And as much as we talk about the rules and as much as we get down into the nitty-gritty of game design, DMing sounds hard, but it isn't. It really
Mm-hmm.
isn't as hard as it sounds. If you understand the game loop, as we
Yeah.
talked about in the first segment of this show, if you understand that game loop, everything else sort of slots in pretty easily.
Yeah.
Uh, what would you agree?
Yeah, I've been running a lot of different RPGs over the last few years, and you know, I now have realized nobody at your table expects perfection. They're not going to have perfection. if you, by some weird reason, you have a player that super understands the game, that'll be good. It's not a problem. It's
Mhm.
not a conflict. We'll all be happy. But most games, when you really kind of break it down, really on one page, you can write down what you need to know. And that's my approach to these games. Is I'll often take the quick start games that rules that show up, and I'll write my own version of it. Okay, on a turn, here's what a player does. Here's what a monster does. Here's how you resolve skills. I'll print out a thing like the list of skills, because it's very funny. That tends to be on no DM screen anywhere, but you need to know what are the list of skills, so you can say, I need a blah check, or however it is that things are resolved. But it's, once you make a few notes like that, I mean, really one piece of paper, you are set to run that game for many sessions. You will at some point hit things that cause you to look some things up if you want to. But the fun isn't predicated on getting it either perfectly or really, even looking it up. You can just keep going. You'll generally be just as well off as if you look it up.
Yeah, it's true. Uh, DMs are in demand like you would not believe. There are so many people out there that want to play this game, and
Yeah.
it's very difficult for them to find a group, very difficult for them to find someone that will run it. And if you volunteer to run a game of D&D, it is very likely, if you are anywhere near the right place, you will find players. And we'll talk more about places to play and finding places to play a little bit later.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, let's even
Anything on
jump into
that?
a little bit of that, because I think one of the questions that worries people is not knowing the rules. And, we talked about how you can watch videos, and I think videos can be semi helpful. Like I watched a Cosmere actual play the other day, and this is a game that I don't super know the rules. I've looked at them a bit, and watching it, I was like, okay, I sort of get it. The pace is very much like what you would expect out of a D&D game. It's a different rule system, but it has a similar pace and actions and so on. But then there were clearly some interesting things their characters could do, and that was somewhat helpful. Did I learn the game? No. Like I wouldn't want to run the game having just watched the actual play, but it can help you feel, acclimated to it. If you can find an actual play of what you're going to run, that can be even better. But you could also go for D&D specifically, play games, right? And that's really easy for D&D. You can go to Baldman Games /virtual-D&D-weekends and play online with Baldman Games with awesome DMs who totally know D&D and see what they do. And I think playing is something that is quite helpful. While it isn't entirely the DMing experience, you get to, if you approach the game from a perspective of watching the DM, it is very helpful. We've had at PAX West for a number of years, we're running all these intro D&D games. Probably around twice to four times a con, someone comes up and says, hey, this intro to D&D sounds cool, but I want a DM. Do you have something like that for DMs? And we'll say no, but if you sit down with this DM, usually the scenario is available online or it's in the starter set or something like that. So you can get this after the show. You could go find this and read this. But during this event, you can just watch the DM, like really be focused on what the DM's doing, so you see how they handle it, and then go and look at the printed version. Sometimes we can even give them a printed version right there. And it's interesting how often they've come back and said, yeah, that was really helpful. And in fact, afterwards, they'll sit and talk to the DM for a bit to ask them, why'd you do this? Or was that in the adventure? So it can be really helpful to play like that.
Yeah. I thought I was a really great DM because I ran for home groups. I ran at college. I ran for different people, probably, 30 different people from the time I was a tween till I was 21. And I thought, I'm pretty good. And then I became a member of the RPGA and the Living Greyhawk. And I really sat down and while I played, or even while I was overseeing an event, I would watch DMs. And I learned how little I actually knew.
Yeah.
Even as a semi-experienced DM, I didn't know everything. I wasn't even close. And I learned
Yeah.
tricks from this person. I learned tricks from that person. And I learned what not to do by watching some people. And I learned definitely what to do by watching other people. And I'm still not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I
Mhm.
feel like I have a much better feel for running a table after watching people DM and
Yeah.
focusing specifically on how they handle certain situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can go online, you can go to game stores, you can go to conventions, look at your local public spaces like libraries, uh, go to D&D Beyond to their learn to play to get those resources as for a player.
Mhm.
And even if you are an experienced player, you know, be open to learning new things as you move from player to DM.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't know the rules super well, the basics aren't difficult. There's really that gameplay loop that we talked about that's really important. Look for adventures like Peril in Pinebrook, Borderlands Quest, Goblin Trouble, and then the Heroes of the Borderlands beginner box. Those three specifically walk you through literally step by step. In the case
Yeah.
of Peril in Pinebrook, quite literally step by step. Now, Peril in Pinebrook has a simplified version of the rules, uh, but it tells you all about the game loop, how to handle checks, how to handle pacing, that sort of thing. So you can check those out. There's links to those in our show notes. Just reading those over, especially those two free ones, um, will give you a great beginning look at how to DM.
Yeah, absolutely. Just understanding that rhythm of the page versus what you're going to do with it. The starter set does that as well for most of the like the beginning of each booklet. You know, we'll have a suggested first thing to run for it, and it walks through how to do it and gives you tips. And while none of those tips are perfect, they don't have to be. And I think something I see on my videos is folks will be like, but wait, you know, you didn't tell me this book doesn't tell me everything. And it's like, yeah, that is okay. That's part of the fun of DMing is not knowing what your players will do or exactly how the scene will play out or how you will even explain a scene. And that's okay because it's not unlike a movie where you film and you're done. You get to keep talking. So if you explain
Yeah.
how there's this, caravan, a wagon broken down on the side, you can say more a few seconds later, right? It's not you can
Yeah.
keep adding or correct or add or work off of what the players are coming up with. It doesn't have to be done flawlessly, word after word. You get to change it and adapt to it and build on whatever ends up happening.
Yep. And even if you make a mistake, as Teos said, generally one little mistake is just a little mistake. You ask for the wrong ability check, you get a spell wrong, you get a monster ability wrong. It's a very forgiving game for the most
Yeah.
part. And so you can just roll with it and make it up as you go. And you even if you don't know the rules perfectly, you can count on players to know what's going on their side of the screen.
Hmm.
So you don't need to know every ability of every class right from the start. Um, right. And if you're playing and a player does something and you don't understand, you don't remember it, just say, how were you able to do that? And
Hmm.
generally speaking, they'll say, "Oh, that's my, first level fighter ability, second wind, and this is
Hmm.
how it works, and this is how you use it." And everyone learns, you learn, and the game generally doesn't get too bogged down because everyone is interested in hearing about the rules for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can always turn to people for help, right? There are so many communities online where if you have any questions, people will help. It's really neat with the starter set videos that I did. People ask these great questions. And, when we had Justice Ramin Arman on our show, he mentioned how when they play tested the starter set, people wondered whether they could move as in a board game, right? Do I just, do I move a square? Do I like how does this
Roll
work?
the dice to move.
Right. Do I roll the dice to
Right.
move? And so you kind of had to nail that down. But even after they did all that work to try to make it really clear, I had a question about how you move on the large map because the movement rules are really around being in a combat, right? And so there was this great, like, hey, this larger map has a grid on it. So how do we move on that map? And so I had to sort of explain, yeah, that you're not bound by movement in the same way. You can move until something happens because it's not necessarily clear, right? But that's the kind of thing that someone can do. You go out and you find someone who's talking about the starter set and you ask them a question, right? Or talking about D&D and you ask them a question. And so it's great to do that. And people who know are almost always very happy to discuss the issues, especially if you say you're a new DM, new player. People will help you out.
Yeah. Are there any videos you can think of that are really good at that sort of helping learn to play as a game master?
There are a bunch. I don't have them in my brain right now. Of there are a number that get mentioned on our Discord quite often.
How about the 5-room learn to play?
That one's my fault. So what I did was I came up with the idea of what if you just used 5 rooms to teach an RPG, and it's a nice option for any DM to get a group started and to take a step back. I think that a great way to do a new campaign in a new year is to say, hey, we're going to do a quick thing to just play through the system a bit. Maybe it's with pre-gens or just, quick characters we make. We don't overly worry about it. Or we're just going to have this short experience to get our feet wet. And then we'll launch into our actual campaign. And so what 5-room Learn to Play does is to say, okay, we're going to take 5 rooms and we're going to have the first room be all about skills. So, whatever you want the situation to be, walk into this dungeon and everything's ruined and there are strange tapestries and stuff. And so we make skill checks to learn about what this place is. And that's a very low-key, relaxed way. It's the opposite of a strong start, but it's because it's trying to help you get going. And so you make skill checks, and that teaches you the basics of roll a d20. You want high, add this modifier from this list, right? And also skills tend to be a nice little discrete section of the character sheet. So we can start the players and say, don't worry about anything on your character sheet other than your name and this skill area. Okay. And we do our first room, right? Then we go to room 2 and we do an easy combat where we're not worried about the threat. We're just teaching the mechanics. And so it's just a couple of goblins or something like that. And now we can point at this part of the character sheet and say, hey, this part, that's your combat section, right? That's where you see what your attacks are. Spellcaster, you might have a spell that's, and here's the spell card for it or whatever. But we get through that easy combat by just going through the basics of the gameplay loop, the initiative, the round loop, right. Things like that. That's over pretty quickly. And we have a third scene that might be role-playing or negotiation, that type of thing that shows us that other pillar of the game. So maybe there's a friendly goblin. We're talking to them and do that. Then we might have a 4th room that showcases some other side of gameplay. It might be very different types of skills. Like now before we were investigating, now we're overcoming physical challenges. Maybe it's something like a trap. Maybe we want to showcase something like what resting is like, right? Just any other part of the game we would want to do. And then the last is to have an actual thrilling battle. It doesn't have to be a super challenging one, but that there's a lot of excitement there and it brings us to a conclusion. And this 5-room stepwise process is a very nice way for both DM and players to tackle a new game.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a great idea. I've tried to do things like that and include a character sheet that folds. So at first you have just this information. After the first encounter, you fold it out and it reveals,
love it,
right, your weapons. And then after you fold it out again, it reveals your spells. And we never quite got it to the point where it was ready to go out. But I think that is sort of what the beginner box, the Heroes of the Borderlands, does with the cards that you put on.
And Draw Steel has for the Delian Tomb, it has the idea of in your first combat, you only use a part of your character sheet or type of actions. And it actually says on these pre-gen characters, use only this part for the first combat, right? And so it walks you into like, okay, we're going to start with just these very simple attacks. And same thing on the DM side, it's having the DM have some simple things. And it goes, okay, now we're introducing minions right? And so both DM and player are sort of slowly building up the list of what they can use on their character sheet. And that is a really nice way to do it, to introduce it, especially with games that have a lot to them, which frankly, D&D does. It has a lot of things to it, right? Your feats, your skills, your different class abilities, all of that. And so it can be nice to introduce them a bit at a time.
Yeah. So now you've decided to DM. You've figured out the rules to the point where you think you've got it set.
Mm-hmm.
This is where things get weird for me because as somebody discussing this topic, I've got many things I want to discuss, but I don't know the order in which I discuss them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's the problem of finding players,
Mm-hmm.
which we've already said. There's lots of players out there, but finding the right players, getting a time, setting for how long
Mm-hmm.
do you start with pre-gens? Do you build characters? Right. That's a question. What you want to run specifically at that first thing is another question.
Mm-hmm.
What you want your whole story to be is also a question.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think thinking about a campaign, thinking about the full story that you want to tell shouldn't be there from the start.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, that's the point, right? That's the fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's what drives you to do this in the first place, is because you want to facilitate this grand story that you've imagined
Yeah.
with a bunch of people. And so part of the fun is thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And without that to push you, some of the other stuff may not seem quite as exciting, might not seem quite as fulfilling. So that's why that's the next thing I put in the show notes is thinking about the campaign that you want to run.
Yeah. Well, and this is why I like going back. I think you're right. There's so much to consider, which is why I like having a little prequel event. It doesn't have to be a prequel to the campaign, but getting your feet wet with the game, getting the
Mhm.
players on the same page, whoever's new gets to work through some things, get a little bit of knowledge down. If you made characters or pre-gens, this teaches you about what kind of character you enjoy playing. So we did that last year. I began the year, I think the previous year in December, I had run an intro to Savage Worlds,
Mhm.
to Deadlands. Then in January, we started our actual Deadlands campaign. And it was interesting to see, the players basically all chose to play different character classes.
Mhm.
Right? Like everybody sort of changed it up a bit. Um, and I definitely learned a lot from that intro run. And so even though it was a separate story, it really helped us sort of ground ourselves in the world, helped me plan out the kind of campaign I wanted to run and what to do to it to change it to make it mine. So I knew a lot more because I'd done that prequel. But yeah, once you are thinking about what you're going to run in the campaign, um, there is a step where you want to take all those ideas, and that's great to have all the creativity you want, but you must funnel it down to things that are manageable. And I think that, to me, that's the key of this process, is that what you want is the potential for lots of creativity, but you want a manageable amount of work, responsibility, scope, right? So that you aren't going to be overwhelmed. If you take, if you start world building the entire world, you're doing a little too much too early for what you'll be able to use initially. And so you're
Mhm.
probably better off focusing on where the characters will start. Have all the ideas you want, but don't spend all your time on that, right? Spend your time on where they're going to be and
Yeah.
move bit by bit, expand outwards as you go.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. It's that not that you shouldn't dream big and world build and ideate and do all of
Mm-hmm.
that. Just do more than that.
Yeah.
Partition off some time to figure out what is this first experience that I'm creating for my players going to be like. And I think Teos has a great idea there of make that first session just its own experience,
Mm-hmm.
simplified and discreet and limited, so everyone gets a feel for the game, for you for them, and them for each other as a group, and just try to get through that first experience.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where something like even right Peril in Pinebrook or the Goblin Trouble like can be such a nice start that you just have that experience, nice and simple, and you go, okay, great. Now we're going to do this new campaign. And as DM, when you're planning out that campaign, whether you're going with something published or not, again, starting small helps you focus, and you can have neat ideas like, this is all due to, warring beholder nations could be a fun concept, but there's no need to state that now because beholders are quite high level, especially once you have multiples. And so this would be a lot of play before we're going to get to that. And so starting much smaller will be more manageable, will be easier to deliver. I think it is good to have some ending ideas in mind. I've in the past, as I was running various campaigns, I got into trouble when I was the kind of author that just keeps building and then later has to come up with the show ending, like Lost. Yeah. When you suddenly have to decide what it all meant, that maybe is a step too late for some of us. And so I've found that what's helpful for me is to have a potential ending, potential reason, explanation, whatever it might be. That is very helpful. And if I need to, I can expand it or modify it, but I want to have that in my mind as to where it could end. And in all things like this, it's good to have a vision for how big it can be, but plans to keep it smaller or expand it, right? Being flexible that way. That's true of your first session. It's true of your, the length of your campaign. Maybe you're thinking it's a 3-month campaign or a year or whatever it is, but that you can adapt it either way. That kind of adaptability is it keeps you sane because you have options and you've thought through a bit. Well, I could always cut this part out and then it'll be fun, right? I'm going to get right to the Ravenloft castle if I need to, right? And here's how I'll do it.
Yeah. And along the same lines as what Teos is talking about, tier 1, so levels 1 to 4, are the perfect save the town tier, right?
Yeah.
It's the perfect tier to tell the story of this small area of which you are a member is in danger from this threat. And at the end of that 4th level, the end of that adventure, you should have rescued the town. And the town should be lauding you, and you should be a hero of that town with that larger threat looming in the background. So the warring beholder nations, right, have troops, and that troop is being led by an ogre who also has magical abilities. And that ogre is in charge of the small army that is in your town's area. Taking down that ogre who rules or has the power of the beholders behind him is the threat that you want for that first little that first little bit of play.
Yeah, that's great. And that's that example of like you can have the idea of beholders, which are going to be beyond tier 1, but thinking about that, okay, maybe there's beholders and I might get to that, but let's start with what the tier 1 challenges are. Who is attacking this town immediately? They might work for larger dangers, but we're keeping it manageable. We're keeping it in this tier 1, makes it a lot more reasonable. And, it's surprising, but tier 1 can last a very long time. It can be a very long experience. And a thing that's healthy is to say, I may want to end with tier 1 and start again, because we may have learned enough about the game that, okay, now we're ready to reset. I made the mistake when I ran Delian Tomb of thinking, it's sort of like a start here kind of adventure. It'll be fast. It's levels 1 to 3. And then I realized, well, actually, Draw Steel, you do a lot of encounters before you get to level 2 or to level 3. And we've been playing a good number of sessions, and there are many, many more to go.
Yeah.
And so I realized, this was a much longer experience than I expected, which I'm happy about. But what I should have done is done a lot more like players introducing each other and getting to know each other, players expressing their goals and backstory to one another. I didn't do all that building because I thought, I'll just do a few sessions of Delian Tomb and then I'll go to something else. And now I'm realizing it's bigger than I expected. I do want to play through it and we're having fun with it. So I will go through the whole thing. But then we will go on to the next thing and have a chance to reset. And I will really lean into those things that I like to do to a campaign to create a lot of flavor between the players.
Yeah. As you imagine your campaign, whether the long-term campaign or the shorter-term campaign, don't be afraid to reference published adventures.
Yeah.
So I know that some people are like, I have the story I want to tell, and this published adventure is just going to railroad me. There is a lot of great content out there. Even if you are running a published adventure or a published campaign, there is a lot of opportunity for you to add your own spin to it. And there's nothing wrong with pulling an encounter from here, an encounter from there, putting them together, changing them around, and fitting them into your story with not a lot of work. And it will take much less work to
Mm.
tweak something that's already written than it is to create something whole cloth.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can use published pieces to establish a part of your campaign. The Dagheart campaign that I'm in right now has begun by playing through The Created, an old Ravenloft adventure that's all about carionettes, haunted marionettes. And so it's definitely establishing the horror angle to the campaign and getting us started. But this is sort of the event that's taking us into the mists to start a Ravenloft campaign. And it's really great because the DM can take that established campaign, modify it somewhat, and bring it into the Daggerheart rules because it's a D&D setting, D&D second edition adventure. But bringing that in, making the changes they want to it, and using that as a starting point for the campaign they're creating. Right? It's a really fun idea.
Yeah. And the last thing about your starting your starting ideas for a campaign is you want to work toward a theme.
Mm-hmm.
You want your players to understand that the tone of this is going to be dark, or the tone of this is going to be super magical, or the tone of this is
Pulpy,
pulpy, right?
nautical.
Whatever you
Yeah.
choose, keep thinking, keep working in that direction to deepen the experience for your players, who will then be more likely to buy in and want to continue exploring as these themes reinforce themselves.
Yeah, and I think that if someone listening didn't hear our episodes on creating a nautical campaign, that's a good example of how you can approach a campaign with a theme and flesh out that campaign. And you'll hear us sort of come up on the fly with what we would do in a nautical campaign that involves, a set of islands and pirates, and what will the threats be, and we sort of think through that and work through that, building that campaign around that theme. It's a very, very powerful way to do it because you suddenly start funneling everything through a lens, and it removes some of that overwhelming amount of choices, because now they're like, well, actually, if it's a nautical campaign, this kind of monsters, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to worry about these other ones. And so now it becomes easier to choose.
Yeah. So we have more to talk about, but not a lot of time.
Yeah.
So we will revisit this topic at some point in the near future to talk more about it. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully our tips have been helpful. And if you have your own ideas for new year, new campaign, how to help new DMs or existing DMs create those new campaigns, let us know and we will add those to our run sheet. Everyone out there, thank you so much for listening. We do this because we want your ear holes to be pleased.
Please allow us to pleasure your ear holes.
That's ear. If you are pleased by such things, you can help us out by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd and giving us some support. We have Master of Dungeon supporters. Thank you so much if you're already there. We have Master of Realm supporters. Y'all are the best. And we have Masters of the Multiverse who really back us so I can mangle some names. Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Rudy Chainsaw Basso, David Bastiansen, Derek the Bearded GM, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Bosjan from Duality Press, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Brobo Ballin, Kevin Criswell, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, the John T. Mantis TTRPG podcast, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JR of the Twilight Perspective, JT Evans, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Gail Kiermandy, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Jaren from Mathis Arcanum, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Sean Molly, Elkin Neal, Tom Nelson, creator of the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Bill Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. Safe travels to all going this weekend. Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Printer from Croatia, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simons, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunner Games, Jeff Stevens at jeffstevensgames.com, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Therese, Ryan Truk, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, Christina Vasilena, photography from Bergen, Norway, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Waziak, Waterford Wizard, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Zewalt Winfrey. Thank you so much for your support. You can also help us out by leaving us a review wherever you listen to the show, or if you watch the show on YouTube, give us a subscription, give us some comments, give us some thumbs, give us the virtual, the digital high fives. Teos, where can people get your virtual high fives?
Find me at alphastream.org. From there, you can get to all of my things, videos and blogs, and all of it. Where do I find you, Shawn?
You can find me on the show socials at Shawn Merwin. Follow the show at Mastering D&D on all the socials. Or, of course, go to YouTube, youtube.com/@masteringdungeons. Well, we've started off with the new year and our new campaign. What are we going to do now?
Oh, yeah. I think that we have to create campaigns based off of all the parts of Stranger Things. I, for one, am going to create my campaign about running a radio station in the Abyss.
I feel like I'm already halfway there.
Too soon, too real.
In the making a podcast in the Abyss, is that the same thing?
Okay. Yep.
Okay, cool.